Hello, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm here to introduce Dr. Tanya Rodriguez, who is the Senior Cultural Anthropologist at Hormel Foods. I'm Ethan Waters, Head of Story for Attention Span Media. We've worked as a strategic partner, storytelling partner with Hormel Foods for close to a decade. So I've had the good fortune to work with and talk with Tanya on a number of occasions, so I know you're in for a treat. Our discussion today is about the intersection of culture and food, and maybe we could start with the obvious question, which is, what does a cultural anthropologist do at Hormel Foods?
Well, I promise I don't dig up bones. That's what most people think that anthropologists do. But what I really do is I use cultural intelligence to solve problems, really to help drive innovation and a little bit of forecasting the future. So a little bit of tea leaf reading. There's an art to it. But I think the thing that is most important to my job is being boots on the ground with the consumers in the field, whether that's a real field where I'm in their homes or in a grocery with them, or it's a virtual field and I'm online with them. But being in touch with the consumers on a consistent basis is really the bread and butter of what I do. I take those stories and I really try to help evangelize the consumer voice throughout the enterprise. And, I have to admit that part of my job is being a little bit disruptive, a little bit of a troublemaker, and making sure that we're never resting on our laurels in terms of what consumer intelligence we have. So making sure that we're staying up with the dynamism of the people who are buying our products.
Right. Tell me a little bit more about just the settings you end up in terms of like when you have the boots on the ground part of your job. Where do you go? How do you find the people to talk to? And what's the sort of example of an interaction with them?
Absolutely. So it's always great to have all kinds of high quality research input. So surveys and focus groups and all of those things are awesome. But I think that being with the consumer in their territory is super powerful. And I always reference the story about, if you want to study tigers, do you go to the zoo or do you go to the jungle? Certainly you can learn about tigers at the zoo, but if you want to know their natural habits, if you want to be on their turf and really see what they do in their environment, you have to be in the jungle. And that's what I do. I'm in the consumer jungle. So how do we go about that? Well, first of all, we do use a recruiter to figure out, which people are going to fit the criteria we have for a project. So do they live in the areas that we're looking for? Do they have the habits that we're looking for? Are they the age groups that we're looking for, and so forth? So those are the people who actually get me into homes. And while I'm in the home, I'm interviewing them. I'm interviewing their family. Sometimes we're cooking together. Sometimes we go shopping together. So it's a lot of fun stuff. And not only on the consumer front, but also on our customer front. So I'm also working with customers. I can go into their venues. I can see how their consumers are experiencing their venues and so forth. I can go into a retailer, see how people are shopping for different goods, and able to storytell back to our customer as well. So there's different ways. And of course, not only is there the ethnography is what the research methodology is called, but it's also organic field work, just being out there, just being out in the world in the food landscape. Here in South Texas, we have the Pearl, we have the Culinary Institute of America. And so we're able to be out there and see all the cool food trends and hang out with people and being online as well. In that organic field work is a way that we can do things. One of the things that I think that we don't talk about enough, but we do so much, is actually try to teach our employees, this being our insights and innovation team and our interns, about different qualitative techniques. And so we have taken food tours of Minneapolis. We have done immersions into insect protein and all these different types of plant proteins as well. So we try to learn as a team. And then we also are in the process of building an innovation and ethnographic field school for our teams, for our marketing teams to be able to go and participate in, and again, have them immerse into the consumer and keep our finger on the pulse.
Right. I mean, there is food is one of those things where we have all these aspirations about how we eat and how we buy, what we should buy, what we should eat. And I imagine oftentimes like what we actually do is much different than what we say we do or what we'd like to do or what we think someone else would like to hear that we do.
Absolutely. Yep. The say do gap. And Margaret Mead, who is, extraordinary, was an extraordinary anthropologist. She's the one who said what people say, what people do, and what people say they do are entirely different things. And that's absolutely true. Right.
Yeah.
So we always want to show our best selves. It's like being on a date, right? You're going to present with your best self. However, as we go along and scratch the surface, we see that not necessarily everything is as kosher as we say it is, right? And that's what I think is so important about the ethnographic approach, about being in the home with the consumer, is that you can really see what are they telling you? What are they telling you their aspirations are? And then you do what I call the pantry test, where you actually open the pantries, you open the refrigerator, and you see what they're really eating and what they're really doing. And then you hear the real story, the struggle between the aspiration and the reality and so forth. And so I think that's super important. And that's how I'm able to be a different voice for the consumer, because I'm actually in their home seeing what's going on.
Right, and I imagine part of that is just having some amount of time to spend with someone, because that allows them to get comfortable with you, to sort of to let down their guard a little bit, like they're no longer on that first date. They feel like you're a little bit of a more of a friend than an interviewer, and that helps bridge that gap, I imagine.
Absolutely. And I love when families are involved, because kids are great truth tellers. And I've had, a wonderful family who were very fit and very into health and nutrition. And, they had all the good food and everything. And the two kids are there and they're like, Mom, Dad, aren't you going to tell her about Saturdays when you don't wake up early and we have to eat Oreos by ourselves? And then they're pulling out the Oreos. So it's lovely to have a lot of different voices speaking a consumer truth.
So that's one side of how you collect information. You also mentioned that you're data driven as well. Could you talk a little bit about how your use of data and how you combine those two things together?
Absolutely. Yep. So we are a qual and quant outfit, and our wonderful analysts are always on top of a lot of the quantitative data, and that's part of my input. We like to see what are we seeing quantitatively, and are there some things that we don't know the whys, right? We can see that the data is there, but we're not sure why people are behaving in this way. So that's what I can go and help uncover, is the why. And that gives a lot of life and color to the data. It's always great to make sure that you're having lots of different types of input, but having the story and the color to it really brings data to life. It gives it a soul.
Could you talk a little bit about your background and upbringing and how that informs what you do now?
Absolutely. So I'm lucky to be a South Texan, and I'm a Latina Mexican-American family. So I come from a very rich food culture to begin with. Specifically, I am what we call Tejana. So I am born in Texas, but from Mexican people. So I have a rich culinary tradition. But also I am from farmers and from ranchers and farm workers. So I have an intimacy with food back many generations. I was raised by a single parent, and we were not wealthy. We were definitely poor, and we were food insecure a lot of times. And so my mother was always, robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, and trying to make those things meet. So I have a deep empathy for people who are struggling with food insecurity. And that led to my work as a social worker previously. So I've seen other consumers, try to figure those things out, especially in an inflationary economy that we're in right now. People are really struggling. So it gives me an in to understand that particular consumer set, and to be able to see all the wonderful things, all the wonderful solutions that they're coming up with as well.
Right. That was going to be my next question: is what do people most misunderstand about that value consumer? What do people not get?
I think the biggest thing is to think that they're satisfied with what they're getting. That's absolutely not the case. It's not like you just give them something and that's what they're going to do. They're super inventive, super savvy in many, many ways, but especially around food. So they're very inventive cooks. They are absolutely great at making a wonderful dinner out of not of meager things. So you see them using starches, and they can't maybe have a steak as an entree, but cutting a good piece of meat up and putting it with starch and really making it extend. That's something that you see them doing. And it's wonderful to see all the concoctions that they do, and especially adding vegetables and stuff, one pot meals. You see a lot of cool things that people are creating. They're simple foods, but they're very satisfying, and they fill the bellies, but they fill hearts as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great thing. The other thing is that if you want to see some cool, innovative, forward-thinking food, go to people who don't have much, because they're always inventing new things, new ways to use things. I tell people, if you know what a tortilla is, you can make 15 things. And they're like, no way. And I'm like, with a corn tortilla, I'm going to show you how to make X, Y, and Z. And that's this type of consumer, the value consumer. They really know how to be ahead of trends and create things. So I think it's really super important to create more security for these types of consumers, for all consumers, but specifically for these types of consumers, so that that innovation can be used, in even more greater ways.
Right. And when you think about the American culinary landscape, some of the major trends have come out of the value consumer population. You think about, Italian food or Chinese food that as it's come to America, or our use, barbecue and the use of ribs as, the parts of the animal that might be least expensive are the places where people have been most inventive and have really created American, cuisine from the bottom up instead of the top down.
Absolutely. Yep, I totally agree. And I think that's what we need to make sure, is that we're always given credence and credit to the cultural diasporas that have created these foods. So soul food, for example, all over the world, there's soul food. There's food that nurtures the soul. But we have to make sure that we contextualize and that we give credit to the African American experience in creating soul food, in a time where they were not allowed to have, different foodstuffs, and they were able to create an amazing cuisine. So that shows their perseverance, their fortitude, and their innovation.
Right. You've talked with me before about the deterritorialization of culture and the way in which cultures blend. But I'm also curious whether it always goes one way, from like separate to the melting pot, and whether you can have a re-territorialization, if that makes sense, if people can sort of, even as they share foods across cultures, whether there's issues about people sort of poaching from other cultures in a way that's not respectful. Or can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I live only 4 hours from the border. So I'm a person who's all about hybridity and blending. And I think that's beautiful. And it's a great thing. So not to distract from that at all. But context matters. Where things come from and who invented them matters. And it's important to give credit where credit is due and not to appropriate. So we want to make sure that when we are blending things, that we're able to say, oh, this is from Koreans, this is from Mexicans, this is from Haitians, this is from so-and-so. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, because in some ways, you see it's an intellectual property that's not being given its due. So we need to make sure that we contextualize. We need to decolonize food, meaning, again, what is the true history of the food? And are we giving credit to these folks? So I used to love to go to food studies conferences, and they talked about, organic and natural and tilling the soil this certain way and doing these things and taking a lot of credit for that as a new paradigm. And I'm like, no, I have to raise my hand and say, that's a native way of living. This is a native way. And we have to give credit to the natives who invented these ways, who were told not to do these things, who were being robbed of their own history, and then have it fed back to them in, rewrap, so to speak. So we need to live in truth, and we need to give credit where it's due. We also need to democratize food. So we need to do what's fair. How do we make sure that there's food available for the masses, not just for certain people who can afford them, but high quality food shouldn't be for high dollar buyers exclusively, right? So there's a democratization that needs to happen. So all in all, it's just important to contextualize, to be authentic, to give credit where it's due, but still make sure that we're creating new things, hybrid things, fusion things, fun, innovative things, but not forgetting where they came from.
Is there anything that we can say about sort of Americans' culinary landscape that makes it unique from other cultures? It seems like such a combination of migrations and immigrations and cultures changing over time. It's so in motion. But I'm curious, like is it possible to say anything sort of broadly about American culinary habits that is different than the rest of other countries in the world?
I think that that's an interesting thing. I think we are known as a nation of immigrants, but I think that that's so much more true of lots of countries now than it has been, right? But I love the idea that freedom and all of these type of, individuality and these type of cultural truths for the United States seem to show themselves in a food collective. So we can talk about hot dogs and peanut butter and those type of things as being iconic for an American experience. So that's kind of fun when you can relate those things. But at the same time, the United States is so known for its diversity and its food diversity. So I don't know that it's necessarily completely unique from other countries. But I think that it's important to see that, man, we've had a lot of inputs. If we look at Native life, if we look at the African American experience, the rich European experiences that we're getting, I think we have some hybridities that are not seen necessarily in other cultures. I know here in South Texas, where we have a lot of Czech influence, a lot of German influence, you see so many wonderful hybrids. And, you'll go into stores even and people will say like, bienvenidos and welcome in and welcome and howdy, and all those kind of things. You see that same type of cool stuff happening with food.
So you have your boots on the ground way of working. You have the data-driven side. You have a team of people at Hormel that are working with you as well. What has surprised you in sort of your recent work about the consumer that has changed Hormel Foods in some way? What are some examples of the work you do going into practice?
Well, I think that Hormel has always been interested in diversity and inclusion. But I think that what that means today is so different. And I love the multicultural work that we're doing. So I think one of the cool and surprising and fun things that I've done recently is with the Spam brand. So really being able to dive into different cultures and see how there are parallels with the love for the sizzle, right? Everyone we talk to, no matter where they're from in the world, they love to sizzle some Spam. Yeah. However, what they add to it is a metamorphosis of culture. It's like a cultural juju that happens, right? So you're watching someone, and they're frying the Spam and you're like, what's going to happen next? And all of a sudden there's some gochujang or there's some kimchi in it and we're going Korean with it. Awesome. Or you see it sizzling and all of a sudden you see, they're cutting it up and they're putting it with a salsa verde and they're going to make some type of chilaquiles with Spam. And so you see, again, that magic, that, difference in creation. So that has been really inspiring to me. I saw a wonderful cook along with a Haitian woman who was using epis, and she was putting that to make a stir fry, a Spam stir fry. So I thought, this is beyond anything I could ever imagine, right? Where this, I love a quote from a Ghanaian American young man that I talked to, and he said, yeah, Spam's American, but it was born in America, but raised around the world. And I thought, that's a fabulous, right? That's a fabulous way of looking at it. And certainly the research showed that. So I think it's moving the needle. We knew that we had a multicultural brand, but that depth, wow, I think we're really getting to new depths.
I'm curious whether you ever turn your anthropological gaze onto Hormel's own team members. He has 20,000 employees, so mostly in America, but also around the world, in South America and China. Do you ever leverage the insights from those team members for your work?
Yes. And I think what we want to do, we're doing a reorg right now, and we're really trying to rethink how we do that even more in the future. But yes, we do have an Inspired Insights panel, and we ask our employees to come and weigh in a lot of different ways. Some of them are surveys, some of them are focus groups, some of them are in-home use tests, but definitely some of them are being interviewed by me. And it's been wonderful to be able to see the thought diversity that's available there. One of the most recent things that we did is we asked our employee resource groups for volunteers to come and share some of their cultural recipes with us that involved a Hormel product. We didn't do any prompting as to what that needed to be. And the ERG participants came to our Innovation Week, and they showed how they cooked the recipe. They gave a history of their culinary diaspora. So in those ways, we're trying to make sure that we're leveraging our employees' thought diversity and, again, that culinary diaspora to inform our brand team specifically. The other thing that we're trying to do is build a live experience panel. So let's say that you want to talk about value consumers, but sometimes there's not enough budget, or there's other types of impediments to getting to consumers on the outside. Let's see how we can get a panel together of people who are currently value consumers or grew up as value consumers, so that the brand teams, marketing teams can talk to the employees and be able to see, lived experience, how people dealt with that, and what were some of the cool ways that they came up with to using Hormel products.
Right. That's really interesting. So on another topic, we've just been through, we're at the end of the COVID years, hopefully. Food habits changed a lot because of, just how people bought food, how people, with restaurants and so forth. I'm curious, in terms of the last 2 years, what have we learned? What are the changes that are more likely to stick into the future in terms of consumer habits?
Well, I want to say just overall, I think what we all learn as a global self is that we're interconnected, whether we like it or not. And so some of us were interconnected and miss those connections, being able to be with the people. Everybody talked about their bubble that they were able to actually connect with, and other people realized that they wanted to be more connected, right? So interconnectedness, I think, is a theme that goes on here, and why it's so important to two things that I think are going to hold. One thing that I think is definitely going to hold is ideas of health and wellness. So people are much more dialed into their health. How do I stave off disease? How do I stave off, any type of chronic disease? How do I stay healthy, not only for myself, but for my family? So health will continue to be a directive. I think technology will get more embedded in that, in terms of wearables and this type of thing, monitoring your microbiome, this type of stuff. But I also want to concentrate on the wellness aspect. I think people are very much more aware of their mental health and need for self-care, needing to, ask for resources, to be with others. I think that will also continue to be super important to consumers. So health and wellness is one, but the other one I think that we really see, even in small ways, is this whole idea of gathering and entertaining, and really understanding what it means to break bread, even if it's with one other person, even if it's virtually, but needing some way to gather together and to eat together and to compartir, we say in Spanish, just to be together as friends and family and so forth. So I think that will also be something that people are trying to do more on a small scale gathering, and then bigger holidays and so forth. But I think people are going to spend more time thinking about how do I be with others in a fun, easy way.
Yes, I feel like we talk about hunger, but it does feel like we're at a time when people are hungry for that form of connection, and using food as a universal language to facilitate that sort of connection seems more important than ever.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important for us to be able to combat food deserts and combat food insecurity, to make sure that everyone's getting that spiritual
Right.
nutrition as well.
So Hormel is all about innovation, and I'm curious in terms of that. What are you tracking now that you're excited about in terms of looking ahead for the next couple of years in your work?
I think we're definitely keeping a track of health and wellness. That's going to be a huge one, just to see how that morphs over time, as we discussed before. But I think this idea of health and wellness of the planet is also important. So sustainability initiatives are super important. I think people of all kinds, so it's not just people who can afford to care, but your value consumers as well. Again, understanding that interconnectedness, wanting to see what food manufacturers are doing, wanting to take responsibility for what they can do. So people, talk about recycling, making a little bit better selection. Oh, if that's in glass versus plastic and so forth. So I think we're definitely going to be monitoring the sustainability front. But I also think this whole idea of the decolonization of food is also important. So how do we invite more multicultural voices to the table? What does multiculturalism mean beyond ethnicity? So I try to explain to people it's not just about your ethnic group, it's about lifestyles and so forth. So I think that's another thing that we're looking at. How can we think broader about the consumer groups and ideas of segmentation that are more inclusive?
Well, Tanya, I'm so excited to have had this conversation, but also to track your work going forward, because every time I talk to you, it illuminates the world that is amazingly complex, the food world in America. So thank you for your time today, and I look forward to our next conversation down the road.
Thanks so much. It's always a pleasure. And I just want to leave with one last thought. It's, the idea of feeding the common good, of being inclusive to people, being kinder to the earth. I think that's the direction that we're going. In the food industry, feeding the common good is literal and figurative, as we discussed. It's really about the nutrition for the body, but the nutrition for the spirit. And in Spanish, we say panza llena, corazón contenta. We say, full stomach is a content heart. And so there's a lot of contentment that we need with the consumer population and just in general. And so I think it's good for businesses to offer lots of hope and to democratize food. So I really appreciate you talking about it. And I appreciate working for Hormel, because they're definitely working to eliminate food insecurity.
Thank you. That's a great place to leave it. Thank you again, Tanya.
Thanks so much.